Swiftly moving on to South Africa, the country's Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has expressed concern about the failure of the South African Parliament to address and prevent state capture, leading to rampant corruption. He emphasized that if another group attempted to capture the state, they would likely succeed due to Parliament's lack of action and accountability. Justice Zondo highlighted the ruling party's obstruction of inquiries and accountability measures, pointing out missed opportunities to combat corruption. He recommended electoral reform and active citizenry to strengthen democracy and protect against state capture. The urgency of addressing these issues cannot be understated, as state capture poses a grave threat to the integrity and stability of South Africa's democratic institutions. Now, joining me to discuss all of this and unpack this story, I have Professor David Monye, Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. I also have Selo Lediga, Chairperson of Action SA, Limpopo Province in South Africa. One welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining me on the conversation.
Good evening.
Now, I'd like to start with you, Professor Monye. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo asserts that Parliament is incapable of preventing another state capture bid. This is coming a year after he submitted the Zondo Commission report, which is a huge indictment on the South African Parliament. In your view, what are the underlying factors that you think contribute to Parliament's ineffectiveness in this regard? And doesn't this statement make the entire Zondo Commission exercise, the millions of rands that was spent in exercising futility?
I think firstly we need to understand that this news is coming at the backdrop of a frustration by the Chief Justice, as well as a number of people who see the slowness in implementation of the Zondo Commission. A number of recommendations that were made quite clearly, and the president has stated that he's going to implement. However, the investigation, the arrest, as well as jailing of people is not taking at the pace in which people were looking for. Time is moving, and there's that sense that should it happen again, chances are high that Parliament might not able to deal with the crisis. However, having said that, there's also a challenge in terms of Chief Justice to continue saying this post his leading of the Zondo Commission. Now he's the Chief Justice. It becomes problematic in terms of separation of power. Parliament has received this with shock, and they are really protesting that it's unbecoming of the Chief Justice, and he has to stay in his lane.
Now, staying in his lane, what do you think has led to this lack of progress in implementing safeguards against state capture by Parliament, as recommended by Chief Justice Zondo? And how would it affect public trust in South African government's ability to combat corruption and its institutions?
There are a number of factors. I think one has to do with the investigation, and key people are found wanting, namely the Guptas are not yet in the country, as you are aware. The South African government has been battling with the UAE government, trying to really get these people back in the country. However, there are a number of others. At the end of the day, it appears that it might be just small fish getting into the judicial system. However, the key players, particularly those in the ruling party, former President Jacob Zuma and the like, so there's the political element of it. So you have a political dimension, slowness within the party to be really hard on fellow ANC members. These are perceptions. As well as the slowness in terms of the judiciary system. At a parliamentary level, I think we face a number of challenges. Parliament itself, the building was banned, operating outside, and we're also confronting with the elections, forthcoming elections next year. So it really takes time to really bring all these dots and link them, and also sequencing. What do you start with? The reforms required, or do you really need the judiciary system to run its course, and as well as slowness at the highest level?
Now, Professor Monya, I'm happy you mentioned the Guptas, who appear to be the poster boys of state capture under former President Jacob Zuma, you know, flying into Vaterkloof with families from India for a wedding, and also just being sort of untouchables. What is the current state of the extradition request from the United Arab Emirates? And what's the public perception of them? There's a feeling that, you know, if the Guptas are not arrested, then the Zondo Commission report implementation is not really working, and they're not getting much out of it, because they seem to be the #1 culprits indicted in that report, apart from SOEs rather. Yes.
Indeed, I think the South African government has done its best. As you understand the challenges which has to do with extradition, there's an agreement between the UAE government and the South African government. However, throughout the process, it appears that the UAE hasn't been forthcoming. There has been some challenges, and therefore they keep on postponing this matter for all these years. And up to now, the South African government hasn't been successful in terms of pursuing these brothers. But having said that, we also have to look at other important players, some former Premier, as well as Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule. He has also his case is ongoing. There are high chances it might be a successful case, and quite a number of others. But it is important to have the Guptas, as well as ultimately get to the former head of state, President Jacob Zuma himself.
Thank you, Professor Monya. I'd like to bring in Selo Ladiga into the conversation. Selo is the chairperson of Action SA, Limpopo Province in South Africa. Now, Selo, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo suggests that the ruling party's majority in Parliament has ended accountability, you know, sort of suggesting that the ANC is protecting its own members. Can you provide examples of how this majority has been used to stifle investigations and protect those involved in state capture?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Selo.
Look, you know what? This country of mine has gone to the dogs, I must assure you. Ne? And South Africa spends over R1 billion to go into a commission to check whether the state capture or not. And let us be very clear. The report says there actually was state capture. And it was Jacob Zuma basically responsible for this as the president of this country. Now the question is, how do we move forward as a country? The Justice Zondo goes on to a Human Rights Commission session to say, you are saying there was state capture in this country, and there are recommendations that must be implemented. Unfortunately, those recommendations to be implemented requires a majority of the ANC. And the ANC decides now, say, okay, we've spent more than R1 billion, we don't care, but then there's nothing that needs to be done. The poor Chief Justice is asked now, you wrote the report, and what is it that the Parliament must do? And it says, Parliament is not performing, Parliament is not implementing. Now let me ask you a question. Why did you spend more than R1 billion just to establish state capture? And thereafter, the ruling party, which is the ANC, says, we're having our time, we are going to look at it, and we're not doing anything about it. I'm really, as a member of the opposition, worried that is this country ever going to come to reality in terms of what is it that we do? Why do we spend this money? Now we are told that, okay, it doesn't matter, we are dealing with this issue. But the question is, this state was captured and the report is clear that there was capture. Now, why is it that Parliament is not implementing the recommendations of the report? And for me, it's the critical thing of saying, so we are a typical African country where nothing works. The liberation movements that have become governments of the day will have their way and they don't care what's going to happen. We'll fight up to the bitter end to make sure that the Zondo Commission's reports, recommendations are implemented, whatever it takes. And 2024 is an opportunity for us to say to the people of South Africa, if you don't want state capture, join us.
Now, staying with you, Sello, I'm happy you mentioned elections. And Chief Justice Raymond Zondo did call for electoral reforms. What is the significance of his call for electoral reforms, particularly the adoption of a constituency-based system? How might this shift in the electoral process, empower voters and enhance accountability amongst public representatives? Because, like you said, they spent R1 billion on the Zondo Commission. They sent the citizens sent parliaments to represent them, and it seems no action has been taken. So, in light of his recommendation for electoral reforms, how might this make representatives more accountable to the people?
No, it will make a huge difference. You see, the ANC depends on just huge numbers of people who don't just vote for the Nelson Mandela in the past, you know. If we say to people, you are in a constituency and you still want to live the way you are living in South Africa, and let me tell you something, for the first time, this is painful to me, we have to ask for electricity from Mozambique. We have to, the last time I was on this show, I couldn't even complete my show because there was no electricity. Now, what I'm saying is that it is important that the people of this country, of South Africa, must be given the opportunity to decide who's going to govern them. And a constituency-based system is the best way to do so. The ANC doesn't want that, because what the ANC wants is for everybody to vote for it, and then out of that, they will decide who governs. And we believe, as Sectionist, that it is not going to be the best thing to do. Now, Zondo's report is going to be compromised, and I can tell you, my brother, in South Africa, even if 10 billion out of you, it will be wasted, the ANC will continue to rule. But we believe that in 2024, our people will express themselves.
Thank you, Sello. I'd like to give Professor Monye the final say as we begin to wrap up on today's conversation. Now, Prof, how can the government of the Republic of South Africa effectively respond to Chief Justice Raymond Zondo's concerns and work towards implementing the recommended safeguards and reforms to prevent corruption and state capture?
I think the situation is much more complex than my colleague. Unfortunately, ANC is not here to answer for itself. However, it's a question of, this is a constitutional democracy. You cannot just stand and just implement things. It has to go through processes. There should be fairness in terms of judgment. We are dealing with perceptions, and perceptions are much strong. However, perception does not really mean that everyone should be in prison. They need to be investigated in a fair trials, and therefore I think that process needs to take its course. The concerns, I think, has to do with the time that is taking for that process. When it comes to electoral changes, it's something that both the governing party, including my colleague who belongs to a small opposition party, need to play an active role within Parliament to change that. This is nothing new. It has always been on the radar system, and there's not much opposition to reforms. So, and therefore, I think there's a need for a 2/3 majority to really change that. But it has to be discussed fairly, and there will be changes. The question is when, and the opposition need to play a critical role.
Thank you very much, Professor David Monye, Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and also Sello Lediga, the Chairman of Action SA at Limpopo Province. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both on the conversation. I do appreciate your insights and your contribution to the program. Thank you.
Most welcome.
Now, this is where we wrap up the conversation for today. In the first half of the program, we did look at the increase in fees for nomination fees in Zimbabwe for presidential candidates to $20,000 and for parliamentarians to $1,000 cash, US dollars. And we just concluded our conversation on South Africa's Chief Justice Raymond Zondo blaming the parliament for lack of implementation of the Zondo report. I'm Benga Bora. Thanks for being a part of the program. See you next time on The Conversation. Bye-bye.